Their advance on the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. Satellite images appear to show a convoy of military vehicles stretching more than 60 kilometers just north of the city. The convoy includes hundreds of armored vehicles, tanks, and artillery. It was reported to be about 25 kilometers from Kiev. The convoy appears far larger than in similar satellite images taken a day earlier. Air raid sirens have been heard in the capital, where city streets are empty due to an ongoing curfew. On Monday, Russian forces bombarded Ukraine's second biggest city, Kharkiv, destroying dozens of residential buildings. Ukraine authorities say at least 9 people have been killed in the ongoing attack.
An onslaught in Kharkiv, a city with 1.5 million residents. Ukraine says Russia targeted residential buildings with volleys of rockets. People in a maternity ward forced to flee to a bomb shelter. Ukraine's president has condemned the bombardment, calling for it to be brought before an international tribunal.
This is Ukraine now. Fire raging and smoke rising from a grocery store bombed by a Russian army that claims to seek only military targets. Destruction is everywhere. In Donetsk, the rubble from at the border of Belarus, peace talks started between delegations from Russia and Ukraine and lasted more than 6 hours, but no agreement was reached. One Russian diplomat said they need to hurry because so many civilians are being hurt by his army. And in Russia, Western sanctions are already taking a bite out of the nation's economy as the at the Polish border, children cry and wonder what their new lives will be like. A woman whose husband stayed behind to fight the Russians wonders what the war will bring for her young family.
Yes, it happened exactly almost less than an hour ago, and there was a major explosion. And why this building is so symbolic is because it has Ukrainian flag on top of it. And already in 2014, Russian forces tried to get control over Kharkiv, and they have put Russian flag on that building. So, and that's why, you know, this has a symbolic meaning also for Ukrainians and for Putin, who wants to put Kharkiv on the knees, but it won't happen. But now what he is doing, he is actually having people here, residents in Kharkiv, as hostages, because, you know, under the shelling that goes on every hour, there is no possibility for food supplies, for medical supplies, for any kind of assistance.
Are you planning to stay in Kharkiv, Maria?
Yes, I do plan to stay because this is my home and I want to defend it as much as I can. So given any help that might be needed to people and, I don't know, volunteering, given medical aid, because, you know, our men are now fighting on the streets with Russian troops that are around on the outskirts of Kharkiv. So yesterday, in the day before, they were attacking from the 3 sides, and now they're killing civilians. We have the reports of 2 deaths among children, and that is something horrible. And that is why we are here ready to fight to the last end, because we have no other option. It's our home and we want to defend it.
What about basic supplies? Do you have access to essentials like food and water? Are people there able to get by?
Well, it's already running. We are running out of supplies. So yesterday there were big lines in front of the shops with supermarkets, small supermarkets, and bread kiosks, because already it's almost nothing left, and you can only get a little from what is left. And the bread, you can buy only 1 loaf for 1 person. So basically, if the shelling continues, and it looks like that's what Putin has in mind, so the town, the city will be in blockade, because there will be no possibility for food supplies and medical supply, what is more important. And that is why we are like on the edge of the humanitarian crisis, and are asking international humanitarian organizations to urgently begin supplying Kharkiv and other cities under Russian attack with what is needed, with essentials.
How are people in Kharkiv dealing with this situation? Are they able to find shelter in the city to be safe?
Well, we have metro underground is used as a shelter, so I know many families who spend their days and nights with their children. Also, people hide in the basements, and we have especially in the residential areas which are being hit by Russian Grad missile system systematically. So they spend their whole days, not being able to come out of the basement, like sitting there for days with the children locked there. And others who can fight with arms, they go to territorial defense units and go patrol the streets and participate as much as they can in pushing back Russian troops out of the city when they try to come in.
Maria, thank you very much. That was Maria Avdeeva, a resident in Kharkiv. Thanks for talking with us. Stay safe.
Thank you.
UN Secretary General says enough is enough when it comes to Russia's attacks on Ukraine. Just one of many of today's diplomats. And taking another look at what is happening on the front lines of the invasion, the UN Secretary General says enough is enough when it comes to Russia's attacks on Ukraine. Just one of many of today's diplomatic, political, financial, military, and humanitarian developments. Emily Schmidt reports on the talks and actions as Ukraine continues to fight for its freedom.
It took this Ukrainian disaster to spark a world diplomacy not seen for 40 years.
Concerned also about supply, not just food, but very basics, gas, electricity. It's March 1st, but it's very cold. We're in the middle of winter in Ukraine. And people are really wondering just how long those supply chains can be kept open. So yes, even though I'm in the western part of Ukraine that so far was more or less spared from bigger attacks, but there are also military warehouses and important military airport nearby Khmelnytskyi that was shelled during the past couple of days. So people are very much aware it's just a matter of time, unfortunately, that they're also in this town are being threatened by potential artillery, by potential missiles that we have seen hit so many parts of Ukraine already, residential areas. We just heard what's happening in Kharkiv. It's really heart-wrenching to know that it's not just a bomb that fall down, but with those bombs, entire chains of supply to help those who've been hurt, injured, are made almost impossible to function. So very critical moments in Ukraine, also here where I am right now in Khmelnytskyi in western Ukraine.
Now, satellite images, Fanny, they appear to show a convoy of military vehicles stretching more than 60 kilometers long just north of the city. Are people there where you are aware of that? And if so, how are they dealing with this knowledge?
Yes, Russian military is basically just regrouping right now. An attack on Kyiv is imminent, and people are very much aware of that. In fact, some of them have started to prepare Molotov cocktails. Really, it sounds very desperate in this situation. How do you confront the Russian military with Molotov cocktails? But at the same time, if you add up just how motivated people are in Kyiv, those who still stay in that city despite the threat that's so imminent, that also tells you that people are ready to defend their country. Now, President Zelensky decided yesterday to release prisoners who are able to join the military, able to fight. Already a few days ago, he said anyone who is able to hold an arm should get a gun. So a lot of guns have been issued here. Of course, there's the concern also among local citizens that things can go out of control in many ways right now. Anarchy can take over in many places. So far, the situation in Kiev is relatively calm. There was a few sirens going off over the night, but our colleagues, our local colleagues who are still in the city are reporting that at least they had a few hours of sleep. However, they're very, very nervous about what's to happen today as this bulk of Russian troops is basically almost encircling this entire city and is ready to strike.
Funny, I was just speaking to a resident of Kharkiv, which is under bombardment right now, and access to basic supplies like food and water, essential items, is now becoming very restricted. What's the situation with essential supplies where you are?
It's definitely better so far. We just heard in that report from Kharkiv that you basically are granted one piece of bread per individual. It's not the case here yet. If you go into a supermarket, you'll still find very basic things, depending on also, of course, in which municipality you are and how many supermarkets are open. The ones we've been to, yes, we have seen those empty shelves, but we still had the impression that at least the very basics can still be guaranteed. Now, this can change any time, of course, if there are more attacks, be it on surrounding places in the area here, not just the military warehouses and the military airbase that I pointed out, but if those missiles that are coming actually all the way from Belarus to here where we are right now, when they are going to destroy very critical infrastructure that is needed to actually keep the supply chains open. So people are worried, even the ones who still get their bread and get their even their vegetables in the supermarket today, just how long that's going to happen. As a result, a lot of people stock up on food and panic starts to set in. And also people who are here in this, well, so far was a relatively calm town, are packing up and they are leaving. They're trying to leave across the border to Romania and try to bring their families to safety.
Is there any hope, Fanny, among the people you were talking to there, that a diplomatic solution could be found in this conflict? Because we do have Ukraine and Russia finally sitting down at the negotiating table.
Actually, we were talking about this very question with our neighbors yesterday in the bunker, and they said they would like to have this glimpse of hope, but at the same time, if this country is being bombed while so-called negotiations take place, they don't really hope that's going to be anytime soon. Now, what we do know, of course, that after this meeting between Russian and Ukrainian delegation that ended without a breakthrough so far, we know that a second round is supposed to take place. It's unclear when, but the people here on the ground are actually calling on the allies and the Western allies to say, please help us, please us in terms of military, please help us in terms of humanitarian aid, and please help us to bring an end to this war, to this full-scale invasion. So people don't really have high hopes when it comes to negotiations with the aggressor, as they say, via Belarus. They rather put their faith into whatever is to come from the West.
Fanny, thank you very much. That was our correspondent, Fanny Fachar, there in Western Ukraine. Well, the first emergency United Nations General Assembly session in decades opened with a minute's silence for those killed in Ukraine. More than 100 nations have signed up to speak out about Ukraine's invasion at the session, which continues today. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres spoke of a moment of truth for humanity.
A minute of silence to mourn those killed in Russia's days-long ground and air attack on Ukraine. Then nation after nation took to the podium, condemning President Vladimir Putin's war and his decision to put Russia's nuclear forces on high alert.
Excellency, we are facing a tragedy for Ukraine, but also a major regional crisis with potentially disastrous implications for us all. Yesterday, Russian nuclear forces were put on high alert. This is a chilling development. The mere idea of a nuclear conflict is simply inconceivable.
A war of this scale seemed inconceivable just days before the invasion. Ukraine's envoy to the UN spoke passionately about civilian suffering in his country and warned that global peace is at stake.
If Ukraine does not survive, international peace will not survive. If Ukraine does not survive, the United Nations will not survive. Have no illusions.
Russia's envoy accused the media of creating fake news about what Putin calls a special military operation and blamed Ukraine for causing the war by mistreating Russian supporters in breakaway regions. This definitely persuaded us that we could no longer ignore the suffering to people in Donbass. The leaders of breakaway regions turned to us for military support. Monday's emergency session of the UN General Assembly lays the groundwork for a resolution members will vote on later in the week. In part, it demands Russia immediately stops its attack and withdraws all troops from Ukraine.
The International Criminal Court in The Hague will launch an investigation on the situation in Ukraine following Russia's invasion. The chief prosecutor, Karim Khan, says there is reasonable basis to believe alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity have been committed in the attack. Neither of the two countries, Russia nor Ukraine, are members of the ICC, but Ukraine has accepted its jurisdiction in the past. Russia, for its part, does not recognize the court's authority at all. Our chief political correspondent, Melinda Crane, joins us in the studio. Melinda, I know that you covered the Balkan Wars and the ensuing war crimes trials. I also know that you studied international law and are very well versed on this subject. Do you think we could see an indictment in The Hague against Russian President Vladimir Putin?
Or the officers who are, in fact, committing crimes on his orders. Normally, you begin with those who are on the ground and then follow the chain of command upward. And yes, I do. If we look, for example, at these latest reports of the probable use of cluster bombs in Kharkiv, or if we look at a cluster bomb confirmed on February 25th against a kindergarten and nursery in the town of Okhotyrka in Sumy Oblast, then, and that's been confirmed by Amnesty, then these are absolutely violations that could be pursued by the International Criminal Court, but there are others as well. For example, Russian forces have boasted of eliminating combatants in some of the places they've fought, including at the airport outside of Kiev. You don't simply eliminate combatants. You are required by the laws of war, by the Hague Conventions, to take them prisoner and give them certain kinds of treatment. So there is real reason to believe that war crimes are being committed here. At the same time, Ukraine has also gone to the International Court of Justice on another matter, namely the violation of its territorial integrity. The law on wars of aggression is somewhat more unclear. That wouldn't probably be a charge that we'd see in the International Criminal Court. But I think that the prosecutor's decision to look into this is absolutely justified. And what it means, as I say, you try to chase that chain of command right back up to Vladimir Putin, and then ultimately he is further isolated. He can no longer travel. If he ever leaves his country, he will be subject to arrest. That's the objective, and as we know, it happened to Milosevic in the Balkan.
There's been a lot of discussion about whether or not the international community should or could intervene militarily in some form. Of course, Ukraine is not a NATO member. NATO at this point says it has no intention of intervening, but we did see NATO intervene in the Balkan Wars. Could there come a point, Melinda, do you think, when NATO might decide that the suffering of the people, the war crimes being committed, are so severe that it needs to intervene here?
Strictly on the point of law, essentially, there are two provisions under which force can be used. One is the right to self-defense, which includes collective self-defense. That would obviously be an easier matter if Ukraine were, in fact, a member of NATO. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. Therefore, it becomes a little bit more difficult. The clearest path would be a UN Security Council resolution. We're not going to get that. That, by the way, was what happened when Iraq invaded Kuwait. As you will remember, the UN Security Council empowered other countries essentially to help get Iraq out of Kuwait if it didn't leave voluntarily. That is a clearer legal position. But Terry, that's the law side. The other side, of course, is simply pragmatism, reality. The adversary here is a nuclear-armed power. I cannot imagine that NATO would go up against Russia under these circumstances when Ukraine is not a member of NATO. The legal situation is somewhat hazy, and the reality is obviously very problematic.
Okay, so that's the legal aspect with respect to NATO and the International Criminal Court. Let's talk about the European Union. We know that Ukraine would like to be a member of both NATO and the European Union.